Item 1, which is the Pledge of Allegiance, if you all follow me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And item 2 will be commissioner comments. So we can start down, Linda, if you have any. Win?
I just want to comment on the good job that the animal shelter did this weekend. They had $25 you could adopt pets, and I think every one of the dogs was adopted, and a whole boatload of cats. I think 50 some out of 70. So excellent job. And the other good news is all of them are licensed. So that'll help us with licensing. And just want to remind everybody, if you've got an animal in town, a cat, even if it stays indoors, is supposed to have a city license, and we need that license to help support the animal shelter.
Well, USD 383 started last week. Next week is K-State, so welcome all of them back. It's going to be crazy, so I suggest you leave home a little early because all of them are going to have probably a problem with all of our cones everywhere. So I do want to welcome all of them back. It's always exciting when Manhattan becomes that vibrant place. When they're gone, we have kind of a relaxing place, but when they come back, it's a different phase, which we all look forward to, and then the game starts the following weekend. So just wanted to say, be careful out there.
Mayor, I would like to, something I meant to say. There was a recent report in the Topeka paper. They've done collected data from all over the state of the number of people that have just flown right by school buses stopped with their stop arm out. And so there's a new kind of an educational process we need to go to. People don't see the driving manual, the driving instructions anymore. And so we need to reiterate that each of us go tell 10 people that there's a real effort to get people to stop at a stopped school bus. The only time you don't have to stop is on a divided highway, the other side of the divided highway. So that's just good to have kind of fresh in our minds.
I just want to reiterate, the last couple of weekends, we've had some events in the city, and I want to appreciate the RCPD for the support for that, as well as the Parks and Rec staff. It's just some great outcomes for not only the adults, but for the kids as well. So I don't know how many people got to attend those, but really, particularly for the Just Try It event that was in and around the city pool, that was a great event. I think what I'll do is ask Ron, we did this on K-Man this morning, and then we did it in front of, with the Chamber of Commerce today, but I think with all the events coming up, as Usha mentioned, folks coming back to school, and what we know about kind of the progress we're making on some of the road repairs and the game coming up, it's probably important to reiterate that. So
sure, thanks, Mayor. Just a little bit of an update for the folks that are here and at home on some of our road construction. So our goal is to have two-way traffic on Kimball Avenue full length by the end of next week, and hopefully that'll happen. Rob, if you want to add anything, you're welcome to. But that's what we're working for. If the weather cooperates, we should be able to get asphalt down. The concrete from Hudson Avenue West is curing, and so there's still more construction to have there. We're looking at needing to get pavement marking down, but there will still be construction occurring on that section, but we hope to get that back open to two-way traffic. We're working with K-State Athletics to try and get the word out about best routes to take. Probably the larger project that is behind schedule and won't be open by the end of next week is North Manhattan Avenue. We did get a lot of that done, but there's a section still to the south that will likely go into October and maybe even November, depending on how that goes before North Manhattan will open back up. So if you've relied on North Manhattan to come in from the the north or go out, you need to look at alternate routes of either taking Tuttle Creek Boulevard to Bluemont or some route like that, or to Denison or College if you're going on the west side of campus. So obviously, there's a lot of activity going on. We're still working on Juliet on brick replacement, so we're trying to get the area done around the school, and got a little bit of time to go there. Some brick placement to occur. We're waiting for that concrete to cure. So please be careful and slow
You had
down.
mentioned before the intersection at Kimball and Tuttle, and I forgot when the timetable for that is.
We have a project that's been awarded through the state to do some additional turning lanes and some pedestrian improvements at the intersection of Kimball Avenue and Tuttle Creek Boulevard, and that's, we don't have an exact start date on that, but it'll likely be later this fall before that work continues. On tonight's agenda on the consent is some phase 2 of our street maintenance for both concrete and asphalt work. A lot of that asphalt work's going to be on West Anderson Avenue, so there'll be still traffic orange cones going up for continued work, certainly in neighborhoods and other areas. So just ask folks to please be aware of that and to slow down.
Okay, thanks. We'll now move to item 3, which is the consent agenda. And the consent agenda contains items that the commission has previously considered or those considered as administrative in nature. And we have on your schedule, I'm not sure when the last time you looked at your schedule, but item C, which had to do with the final plat of Scenic Crossing Unit 4, has been pulled from the agenda upon the request of the original offer. So we now have the consent agenda as written minus item C. So discussion on the consent agenda for anyone?
I just have a question, a process question on G. Do I have to vote no on the entire section, or can I just vote no on G1?
Yeah, you can elaborate your specific point.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure of that. So,
It'll
yeah.
make-
Oh,
To make that easier, I just want to pull item G1 to the,
Just G1 or G?
G1, that's it, to the regular agenda. That's the city budget. And also item J, which is the salary piece of it.
Okay. So, as many of you may know, any commissioner has the right to move any of these consent agenda items into the general agenda, so that's what we'll do tonight. And as described then, item G1 will be moved to the general agenda, as will item J.
Public hearing.
Is there any other comment here? Okay. So public comment on the consent agenda, please. Anyone wishing to offer a public comment on any of the items on consent agenda, please come forward, state your name and address. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, seeing none, we'll come back to the commission.
I move we approve the consent agenda by
Minus G1 and
minus
J.
G1 and J to the, moving that to the general, end of the general agenda.
Okay, and I second the motion.
Okay? Call the roll, please.
Mayor Dodson,
Yes?
Commissioner Reddy,
Yes.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner McKee.
yes.
And Commissioner Morse.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Item 3 is the public hearing. So at this time, I will open the public hearing, and the item is item A, proposed Aggieville redevelopment plan. And the presenter is Jared Wassinger, Assistant to the City Manager.
Mayor, Commissioners, tonight we are conducting a public hearing and considering first reading of the Aggieville redevelopment plan. Tonight I'm going to go over a little bit of a background of the Aggieville community vision and how we got to where we are today, as well as the tax increment financing timeline that we've gone through, and then go into detail of the redevelopment plan that we are considering tonight. Mic on? All right. Just a little background. We started an Aggieville Community Vision process back in 2016. We did a survey that got over 4,000 responses from not only local residents, but alumni, people who, own property in Manhattan but don't necessarily live here all year round. And there was a lot of feedback regarding updates to Aggieville as it related to parking, as well as streetscape improvements, development, and things of that nature. So our Community Development Department that same year created a State of the Ville report, which kind of gave us an idea of where Aggieville stood today, and also as it related to the comprehensive plan. We entered into an agreement with consultants to do a parking infrastructure analysis, as well as an analysis of other infrastructure, water, utilities. In 2017, that report came back with recommendations related to infrastructure updates, as well as the demand and insufficient capacity of parking within the district in the event we see the growth that we want to see in Aggieville over the next 20 years. And then we went into that community vision process a step further, really define what we wanted to see in Aggieville. We adopted that as a part of our comprehensive plan, and then we took that Aggieville community vision a step further with our consultants to create that community vision to reality plan. And that's where we went into those conceptual designs of streetscape improvements, parking garage locations, parking management, and development. To fund a lot of those improvements, we worked on creating what's known as the tax increment financing district. We established the TIF district via state statute, which is allowed through the state, and it encompasses North 14th Street through Anderson Avenue all the way to Bluemont, North 10th Street, and then Fremont. And tax increment financing allows a base valuation, property valuation, to be set in the district. And then over time, as valuations increase in that district, we capture that incremental revenue over time to fund improvements in the district. So back in February, we did a similar process that we're conducting tonight. We set a public hearing date to establish the district. In March, after we set the public hearing date, we noticed all of the property owners and tenants within the district that it's occurring. And then we had that public hearing and first reading of the TIF district boundary, which is what you see on this slide, back in March. When that was approved, that gave a 30-day period for the school district and the Riley County Commission to veto that district, which they did not. So we moved forward with the second reading and established that TIF district. And that set the base valuation for the district so that incremental revenues can begin. The next step in the process is to adopt a redevelopment plan, which once the redevelopment plan starts, via state statute, it starts a 20-year clock to capture those TIF revenues and then start using those revenues to complete the projects according to the plan. So a different step in the district boundary process was you create the TIF redevelopment plan, and then you provide that to the Manhattan Urban Area Planning Board. And they need to vote on a resolution finding that it is consistent with the comprehensive plan, which they did on June 17th. Then back in July, we set today as the public hearing date for the redevelopment plan. So we're going to have that public hearing tonight, and then if the first reading is adopted, we'll come back with a second reading on September 3rd, and then that'll start the 20-year clock, if approved, to start capturing those revenues, like I had said, and start completing some of those projects. So in your packet was the redevelopment plan. It's pretty straightforward because the project improvements that we are doing in Aggieville are all related to public infrastructure, property that we own, streets, sidewalks, everything underneath the ground, as well as creating a public parking garage on our property. So we went into detail about each location within the district and gave general descriptions of the type of improvements that basically you're going to see along each segment, you know, whether it's Morrow Street, Laramie Street, 12th Street. We're going to be, you know, changing the configuration of the streets, you know, redoing the sidewalks, possibly widening the sidewalks, putting in street furnishings. Those could be seats, they could be trash receptacles, lighting, utilities, you know, possibly working with Westar on some public utilities, public Wi-Fi. Could include changing the landscape of on-street parking in order to, you know, if you take off some of those on-street parking, you can have the ability to widen those sidewalks and narrow the street. We also mentioned in there the Laramie redevelopment project, and that would be the public parking lot that would just be south of Kites. So we mentioned in there the potential for the city to redevelop that site, or us to sell or lease that land to a developer to help with the community vision growth. The redevelopment plan also goes into project costs and feasibility. Olson, when they did their Aggieville community vision to reality plan for us that we considered and adopted as a commission, they gave an estimated total project cost of anywhere from $23 to $30 million. We also hired a consultant to give us projections on how much TIF revenue we could possibly see, and they gave us a low, moderate, high estimate, which ranged from about $15 to $20 million over that 20-year period. So as you can see, there's a gap. So we also list other revenue sources, and really, we pretty much listed every revenue source that's out there or advisable from the commission to fill that gap. Obviously, you know, we're proposing to use revenue from the 0.3 sales tax initiative that's on the ballot if that passes. But there are of course, other options to fund some of those improvements that we list within the redevelopment plan. There is, you know, state statute requires a relocation plan. We're not proposing relocating any properties. Those of us who were around back during the downtown redevelopment TIF district establishment, there was redevelopment that occurred in there, or relocation that occurred with certain properties and occupants. Again, we're working with public infrastructure here, so we're not purchasing someone's property and telling them to move or doing any of that, so there's no relocation plan. With that, I'll stand for any questions, and if not, we can open up the public comment portion.
I have a
I
question.
just want to remind everybody kind of the state of this initiative. In other words, is it at the conceptual phase, it's at the planning phase, at the execution phase, and maybe, Jason, maybe you can say a word or two about that.
Well, yeah, right now we're in design contracts with Olson on designing the parking garage south of Rally House. They're also going to be designing the street and sidewalks on West Laramie and 14th Street. They're also going to be designing, I believe, 12th Street from Bluemont to Morrow Street, as we're anticipating the construction of that hotel, and as well as maybe some of the Bluemont corridor design work. But all that right now, of course, is conceptual, so the plan in and of itself is just conceptual in nature, and nothing's really set in stone on what we're actually constructing.
We're just starting now to work with Olson and Walker and BBN on the parking garage. They've done the geotech, so you've seen the drilling occur at the parking lot, so they'll evaluate those soils. We'll be looking at schematics and concepts soon from them and showing just what part of that site will actually be occupied by a building, what will be occupied by sidewalks, and what will be occupied by an alleyway. A lot of the concepts that we saw had an alley between parking garage and the Varney's building, Rally House, and a lot of those site details need to come to a point of definition where we know exactly where the corners of those buildings will be located. We haven't seen those yet. They're developing those right now. But as Jared mentioned, we have a lot of other infrastructure on Laramie and 12th Street that's being designed. This governing body executed a $1.2 million contract with Olson and Walker and BBN to start that design, and that'll really take place this fall. We will have an open house meeting probably late September, early October, more than likely at the pavilion like we did last year, and open up the facility, bring in the designs, and invite all owners and residents to come down and take a look and give us their feedback. Ultimately, those concepts will make their way back to you all in a work session this fall, and then we will probably look towards final design being complete early 2020 before we would then look to a construction phase. One thing we will be bringing back before you all is a request to go out for an RFQ, RFP to actually hire the construction manager at risk early, bring them on board. We had such great success with our middle school rec centers and our CM at risk with the GMP. That way, as an entity and as a community, the amount of money we want to spend in the garage can be defined, and we can go work with a contractor to deliver that project. Rather than testing the market with 30 days for a bid, we can actually get into a guaranteed maximum price, much like we did with the rec centers on tonight's agenda. So we're excited to bring that before you all. You'll all have to, the governing body will have to approve that, but that is where we're headed internally, and that should be back before you in September.
Great, thanks, I appreciate that.
So that's a good lead into my question. I realize that we have to approve all of these projects in the future. I get that, but part of why we do this is to present to the planning board and show that we have a source of funding. One of the things that's in the consultant's packet right above the TIF district scenarios, it says our projections reflect levels of property valuation that could be achieved within the TIF areas now and in the future with the addition of new facilities and new activities. If this new development does not come to fruition as represented, the estimates presented within this document could be materially impacted. So my question is how do you know from working with the consultant how much of, like, per se, certain projects represent some of their estimations that we have in here? And the reason why I ask that is because I think I've made it known that if the sales tax doesn't pass in November, I have very little interest in spending all of the money on the TIF money on the parking garage. But if the commission were to make that decision, let's say in a couple of months, how does that impact essentially what we just presented as a scenario for funding to the planning board?
So the public infrastructure improvements that we've outlined, the $23 to $30 million, can be viewed as catalyst type projects. If we sit and wait with no public improvements being made and expect a private development to come along, I think we might be waiting a while.
I agree. I guess my question is, when the consultant made this, was there more importance put on the garage scenario than maybe 12th and Laramie being started before maybe the garage? I guess that's my question. If the commission decided to spend the TIF money on those two projects rather than the garage.
Yeah, this consultant didn't get into the details of what public projects would take place when.
Got it.
What they did was they looked backwards and looked at growth and looked at the potential in the future. So to suggest that investment in the garage is absolutely part of that analysis and it has to happen right away, that's not what he did.
Got it.
But there is obviously an argument to be made in terms of the public investment being made in the district being a catalyst for the private investment.
So it's more or less a general statement: if you do nothing, if you make no public investment in these areas, regardless of whether it's the road project or the parking garage.
Not even necessarily. One strategy could be for us to sit and wait and not invest until the private sector comes to the table. When we did the TIFs downtown, we clearly had a developer coming along with us. We acquired property, we had development agreements in place that required them to go ahead and invest on the private side. Based on the history of this district, knowing we had these improvements to be made, our investments are likely to leverage private dollar investments. Adding inventory of parking to this district, which has been documented for over 20 years of having a shortfall, will give other owners an opportunity in that area to invest in their property. That inventory of 550 stalls has been the same inventory for the past 20 years, past 40 years. Decades upon decades upon decades of the same inventory, and our own analysis suggesting there's a deficiency. and inventory of parking. It's really what's led to the momentum to this garage and what we're designing and possibly even starting construction on in 2020. It reacts to several factors. One, without the inventory, you're going to have a really hard time attracting the private dollar to the area. For the last 20 years, we've heard a lot from developers who wanted to come in to Aggieville that just simply didn't because the inventory wasn't there.
And that's totally, I get all of that, and I'm not looking to have that argument tonight. My question is, it says new facilities and new activities are represented in these scenarios. So my question is, how big of a role does the parking garage versus the street projects play in those scenarios of our revenue outcomes?
And I really do, what I'm trying to answer, I do believe that is very relevant. Because I do think the parking garage has an enormous impact on that private investment.
And that answers my question.
Much like the parking garage for the own hotel that's under construction, or will be under construction in the next 60 days, without that parking for their own facility, they would have never built that hotel. They knew they had to invest in enough parking stalls for their own hotel in order for it to survive in Aggieville, much like the Blue model.
Thank you.
Yep.
Actually, I have several. Does the ordinance that we'd be adopting tonight also include the eastern blocks labeled possible TIF addition, east of 11th?
They are included in the district.
They are, okay. And do we have a vision of what, do you have a vision? I don't at the moment, of what could be, how that, because there's nothing there now and we're just working on streets in the main district. So what is it we're proposing in the possible addition section?
The structures that are there are obviously majority single-family homes
agree, yeah.
that are rentals. There's an opportunity there, since it's in the MFRO, to assemble properties and create a higher density type of product, more than likely a residential product. It was an opportunity for us to grab another block, include it in the valuation and that potential growth within the district. We couldn't go north, or we would have, and captured a couple very large projects that are, one just opened and the other about to start construction.
We were too late.
We couldn't go west
Right, I know.
and potentially grab or, capture some of that growth. So we went east a block, knowing that potential is there. And since the MFRO has went in place, these 3 blocks between 11th and 10th just have not seen a lot of, capitalized opportunity. And we believe it's there, and maybe with the TIF there and the adjacent redevelopment, it'll give it an opportunity to grow.
So there's no part of this plan to redo the infrastructure there. How would we add it if a proposal came along?
If a proposal came along and we were seeing revenues exceed projections, we could amend that plan
Okay.
and incorporate more specific public improvements.
So if another hotel came along and we could put it there and
I do think we described
use
those,
the
did
TIF.
we not, Jared?
We include the public infrastructure improvements from, so like when we define Morrow Street in the redevelopment plan, we're talking about Morrow Street all the way through to 10th
to
Street.
10th, okay.
Now, will we develop Morrow Street to 11th first? Probably, because we'll want to wait until a redevelopment is occurring. And if that opportunity presents itself where a developer is saying, yeah, I want to extend and do some residential mixed-use development into 10th Street, we can extend those designs that we have for the streetscape improvements into those areas. So it is included in the redevelopment plan that with our TIF funds, we have the ability to use those funds to invest in these streets as well.
Okay, good. Another question is, you mentioned that this applies to the land the city owns, public land. So I know the parking lot south of Kites. What other land does the city own that could be developed?
So we do identify the public parking lot south of Kites.
Right.
And that is identified as a potential redevelopment project. We do also own the parking lot at the corner of 11th and Morrow Street. If you recall from the Aggieville Community Vision Plan, that is another site for a potential parking garage, public parking garage. But as Jason said, we could always come back and amend the redevelopment plan if in the event we do need to possibly purchase surrounding land, relocate. Obviously right now there is no actually relocation because it's also just private parking there. But we could come back in 10 years, and if our parking garage is doing really well and there's a lot of development and we need more parking, then we can come back.
So there
But
are only those two sites?
And then the existing one that we're designing for the parking garage currently.
Yeah,
So there's
right, of
three.
course.
Yeah,
Okay.
the parking lot on Morrow is a lot in. The one on the end is owned by Gwen Riffle, so we used to be
Okay.
able to park there for Wahoo.
Right.
He signed it privately, but Gwen, for the most part, didn't mess with too many people parking there from a public standpoint.
So it's
But
a
the
small
next two
rows.
drive aisles are owned by the city.
okay.
We had 4 originally. We obviously sold one.
Right.
Next to Starbucks to the hotel. So they're gonna start development, more than likely into September, early October. But yeah, we're down to 3 now, as
So-
potential sites.
It is also possible for the city to sell like that lot.
Correct.
If there's an interested.
Sell or a public-private partnership, or, yeah, if we wanna
We're open
retain
to-
some sort of public
Okay.
component. Yep.
I just wanted to identify all of the sites.
Triangle
'Cause
Park
is K-State owned?
is maintained by us, owned by the university.
Yeah.
I'm sure they'd allow us to invest in the park if we asked them. But
Yeah.
yeah, it could be part of that.
Okay. On the revenue projections on page 7 of the, have the 3 scenarios, the low scenario, moderate scenario, and high scenario. And how should we read it? So I would tend to go to the conservative, but I just wonder, as time goes on, how will we pick which category?
A lot of that analysis was done to give you all a sense and staff a sense in terms of if we were gonna pursue bonding. Downtown, we issued TIF bonds before we had revenue. And in order to size those bonds, you have to look at that projected revenue stream for that full 20 years. We've had internal conversations about issuing GO debt for our public improvements and then using TIF pay-as-you-go to supplement those annual debt service payments. That would give us the greatest amount of flexibility moving forward. You could commit to a project up front, knowing where those projections are at, and size your bond accordingly. If the revenues start outperforming what you've sized that bond, then you can move on to the next project and potentially dedicate TIF revenues towards multiple phases of the redevelopment efforts. When we talk to you all about moving forward with the garage, moving forward with 12th Street between Morrow and Bluemont, moving forward with Laramie between North Manhattan and 14th Street, we recognize there's a lot with those 3 projects. You know, we're in the 12 to $13 million range just with those 3 segments of Aggieville. Point 3 is obviously going to be a very big factor as we move forward, much like it is with North Campus Corridor, joint maintenance facility, the list goes, the runway, the list goes on. If it passes, then clearly we have a funding source. If it doesn't pass, then we're right back in here talking more strategically on how we want to move forward with all these initiatives and just where we're going to pay for them from. But the TIF revenue will start, we'll monitor it, and we'll be able to roll that into projects as they come forward with a projection of how much it'll be able to satisfy in that overall debt.
Because that's my other question, when I look at the projections for the 3/10 of a sales tax, is the principal was 20 million, but with the debt service, it was gonna be 38 million.
Correct.
And that's practically twice as much. So I just want to be sure that we have the right dollar amount in mind as we,
Yep, and for Aggieville, you're correct,
Right.
20 and 38. For the overall, we were closer to 70 and 110 or 120. I mean, we've sized these things
Yeah.
accordingly, not only a principal, but with interest as a way to offset those annual debt payments.
thank you.
So when we did the downtown TIF district, how much did you project and where are we at when you started? You were there from the beginning.
Yeah, you know, we started with feasibility studies in '05. We didn't issue TIF bonds until 2009. And a lot of our TIF was reliant upon the developer actually delivering. So Best Buy opened in '06. We opened a grocery store soon thereafter. Soon thereafter, we issued those bonds, so '09. There's a real big difference between the TIF bonds downtown and what we're talking about doing in Aggieville. At downtown, we were linked up with a developer who was committed to build commercial and residential property in order to generate the increment. That we used those commitments to leverage those bonds in the public market. There are bondholders all across the country who have a piece of our $21 million in TIF bonds for the north and the south end. We had to generate enough revenue to offset the costs that we had incurred from '03, '04, '05, '06, all the way up through '09. We created 2 tiers of bonds, TIF A's and TIF B's. They're both performing very well. Now, we sized those with a lot of debt coverage and a ratio that was very conservative, and we're generating revenue in excess of our projections. We're coming at Aggieville with a little bit more of a conservative approach, not as aggressive with the developer, suggesting they need to go build these things right away, but we're also gonna have general obligation debt instead of TIF bonds out there. Now, we had to put a moral obligation on our TIF bonds, so from Ron and I's perspective, it's as if we issued GO, because if the TIF doesn't cover it,
We have to take
we
care
gotta
of it.
find it
Yeah.
somewhere. So issuing general obligation debt for our public infrastructure in Aggieville with a revenue stream, we actually get to leverage that revenue without paying all the interest and the debt service coverage that's required to go out on the open market. We feel like we're gonna leverage more out of the dollars we receive from this TIF than we did downtown. A lot of money downtown is going into the pockets of the people that bought those bonds and financed them at a 4.5% to 5% rate. And we can issue our debt closer to 3%.
Yeah, I think you're right, they're very different, but at the same time, I wanted to have an understanding of how we are performing. I think Aggieville's been anticipating this for some time. There was a lot of people involved in this vision plan for years now, and it does need something different, something to give it some momentum and move forward with it. So I'll wait to hear public comment and then make comments later.
The hotel alone, I think I've made this comment to you all, when we project 15 to 20 million over a 20-year period, the hotel alone will generate 5 million of that. So anywhere from a third to a quarter will be generated from that property alone. The more projects like the hotel we can encourage to happen within the district, the better this funding source is going to be. And there are proposals circulating in the community in and around Aggieville. And I have sat down with those developers, and I will admit it, I've encouraged them to come into Aggieville because that's where we need that type of investment. We're set up for it. Our plan forecasts it. Our comp plan has been approved to allow it. But the main concern on all these projects, the main concern will always be parking. Always. That will stress every decision. Even This governing body, when we brought Aggieville regs and we proposed a 0.75 parking ratio per bedroom, and we bumped it back up to 1 because of pressure. It's everywhere, and it's in everything we do in that district and in that area because it's that important.
Okay, well, we'll go to public comment now. And what we have here is a list. Some people signed up in advance, so we'll take those two gentlemen who signed up first. And then after they're done, we'll just see who else would like to come up and comment. And as you come up, just remember to sign in and state your name. And then if you recall, there's a clock over here, so we want to give everybody adequate time. So we hold you to 5 minutes of comment, and you'll get a 30-second warning on that. So first, Mr. Varney, I think you signed up first.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Bill Varney. My family has been involved with Aggieville for 115 years, and we're very strong supporters of Aggieville and have been for all that time. I'm here representing a corporation that is a family-owned corporation called, interestingly, Varney's Incorporated. And most people would understand the Varney name because of the bookstore throughout the decades. But in this particular case, you may not know that starting in right after World War II, my father and mother spent close to 25 years buying up properties to the west of the brick building, the bookstore at that time. And then in 1985 and 86, built a structure that looks more like a strip center. And this is the area that is occupied. I'm going to read them in order. It's with the Mr. Goodsense at the eastern edge, and then there is the cookie place, and there's the hair experts, and then there's a chiropractor, Dr. Shaw, and then there is FedEx, and then at the end is the quick shop with the gasoline pumps. And so on the area, as you're looking at that, incidentally, the thing you're looking at is what's called a perspective dealing with roofs. So I've gotten onto that because we're replacing the roofs right now. And so you're looking at the tops of the buildings. And over on the right-hand side is Northern Van Nant Avenue, and where all the cars are parked, that's the city parking lot, ground level. And then there's a little gap of 20 feet. And then that rest of it on up to 14th Street is property owned by Varney's Incorporated. We have been in support of the TIF for Aggieville. In fact, I don't want to be misconstrued. We have some concerns, but it has to do with the adjacent proposed parking garage where all those cars are now. If the lot was full today, there would be 75 cars there. In the visionary scene that were furnished, if the city built a parking garage all at the edge of its lot, which is 250 feet long and 150 feet deep or wide, that would produce 489 parking spaces. Wow. But if you do that, then you have some problems, and I'm going to be very brief. And in the sheets that were handed out to you a couple hours ago, and you haven't had a time to look at them, I'm sure, but in doing that, you would find that the cars that are parked next to the Rally House wall are within about 2.5 feet of that wall. that probably to me means that the city lot is about 2.5 feet on that side and runs all the way up to where Burger King's parking is. If you look at where the Varney's property is, you'll see that there's a little bit more of a setback. But let me tell you that if the parking garage were 5 stories, that's the visionary height, that if you were to walk out the south door of Mr. Goodsense, and today you would see cars parked in the parking lot on ground level, but if you walked out after a 5-story parking garage was built, you would be standing there right after you got out of the building and looking up 50 feet. Now, I'm 87 years old and I can't look up that far, and you people are nice and young, so you could do that, but what sort of an impression do you get if you want to have customers come and go through a big, imposing, and we've used some words like humongous, didn't use dinosaur, but elephant, and that's what you're going to have. 5 stories, 5 minutes up? Sorry. Okay, I'll close in 15 seconds. Let me say that in the proposed Aggieville development plan, which is what you have before you this evening, it is very specific as to where the first parking garage would go. Mr. Fear tells me that the ultimate design or desire is to have more parking garages, at least 1 more, maybe 2, in the Aggieville area. But this one's specified, and we would urge you to table this motion that will come at the end of this public hearing and address some of the 9 not objections, but problems as we see it, and see if some of that can be resolved conceptually. And at that time, then we wouldn't have nearly the problems we think you'll have. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. The second speaker is Mr., is it Greighton or Gritton? Gritton.
This one? Yeah.
Hello, my name is Joe Gritton. I live at 303 North 14th Street, and I'm also have interest in the same property that Bill just spoke about. But I wanted to highlight a couple of particular issues with the proposed parking garage. One, we do certainly understand that the property is owned by the city where the garage will go, but just want, as we go through the design process, to just highlight how that would affect the adjacent neighbors. So right now, people get to, particularly Mr. Goodsense and Insomnia Cookies, more ways than just from the north. They come from the south, and they visually see the businesses there. They walk there, and they also can drive in the parking lot and park there to go to those businesses. Mr. Jim Jacobs, who's the manager of Goodsense, has told me that he estimates at least 30% of his clients or customers come from the south, come from that back door. And so the 2 particular aspects of this project that I'm the most worried about or concerned about as the design goes forward are, one, that that this whole shopping center is able to be accessed by pedestrians from Aggieville. And that means, and I've kind of crudely drawn in a green little strip there to represent a large enough sidewalk that people could access the businesses from Aggieville by foot. You know, because if the garage is built, and I have no idea what the designers are looking at, but if the design was to be built right up against Rally House, so there's no way through, it really hurts the effectiveness of the buildings or the businesses that are in that shopping center. The second is, once again, having no idea where we're at in the design, if a garage were to go in there with that access, that there's some kind of, and I just tossed in a couple red dots as examples of if there's some kind of access from the garage to those businesses as well. So as people come and park in the garage, they're able to access the businesses without walking clear out and around. So, you know, it's pretty simple. I just wanted to highlight that as the design goes forward, that those two aspects of the project, that the designers really look at that and are encouraged to consider those for the viability of those buildings, because without these, it really hurts the businesses that are there, and it really hurts the value of the property as well. Both the businesses, if people can't get to it from both the parking lot and from the rest of Aggieville. So that's all I had. Thank you all very much for listening, and I can answer any questions. I don't know if we do that here, but.
We appreciate it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Anyone else, please?
Thank you, Scott Sieben, 2233 Buckner Drive. Just wanted to kind of throw my name into the hat on supporting this. I think it's great to have down there. We need more parking. I recently bought kites to try to keep that tradition alive down there, but with the idea of having more parking, more structure, some infrastructure helped in the parking lots, streetscapes, you know, those were things that I was investing in as well. I think it's good for the district. I think adding more cars in a centralized location that they can walk to different businesses, you know, it's not just bars and restaurants down there. We have, you know, all kinds of different businesses in that district that I think would benefit from the ability to have a more centralized location for people to park, a safer area. I know some of the designs we've talked about putting the police station in that parking lot for the city. I think that's a great idea as well, to keep that safe and just grow the district. I think Aggieville is something that is K-State, it's Manhattan. It's something that I believe in. I invested in this business with the idea of hopefully, you know, these things would come to fruition. Obviously, you know, it's still down the road. Hopefully we can move this thing along and get it going. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Dennis Cook, 6854 Chinkapin Circle. I'm the director for the Aggieville Business Association and been before you guys a number of times. We are very positive about what is going on down there. You know, a little, you know, just going back over the last few years, you know, there's been so many public hearings and we've had, you know, surveys put out. Going around to the district, we've had, you know, a 95% plus in favor of moving forward with these projects, and you know, we're getting a lot of phone calls. We're getting a lot of stuff that's going on. We think it's going to be just nothing but positive. I think that you know, as I've been involved in some city meetings and some chamber meetings, I think that Aggieville is a big part of the region reimagined. I think we're a big part of the direction that the city needs to go. We can be that entertainment district, the thing that's going to help bringing in the next wave, the next generation of employees into this town that brings us the tax base that we need. I think it's very important that they have a place to go, and as a city and the chamber have looked at knowing, you know, who we are competing with, other cities that we're competing with, that these are the kind of things that we need to develop. We need to do this, and we have a district that has been ignored for a lot of years, and it's kind of time to be spruced up. But I will say, just here over the last month, we've had Actually, two new tenants have moved in over the last couple of weeks. We have 2 new tenants who have just signed leases that will be coming on here in the, as the fall goes on, but they have, that we're adding 2 more tenants onto Morrow and some vacant spaces. And they are paying attention to where this is going and how they can grow their businesses. So I think it's a very positive thing. I think that the work that's been done is great, and anything we can do to help keep moving it along, we are wide open to any conversation about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. Appreciate it. Anyone else? All right, well, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. We'll come back to the commission. And Jason, while you're up there, maybe it's important to note kind of what would be the next steps. What I'm thinking about here is how we incorporate the thoughts of Mr. Varney and Mr. Gritton into how we move forward here.
Yeah, as I mentioned, with Olson and Walker, we'll be meeting with them over the next several weeks, and we'll have public process to where we'll open things up to the public. We're very receptive to owners' comments. We had a lot of owners and tenants weigh in on that preliminary design. Unfortunately, I don't believe we heard from Mr. Varney or Gritton, so we're very open to that conversation. As a neighbor, clearly, we need to listen to what they have to say and see if our design can accommodate them. We obviously know with the Rally House building, we're not going to be able to build right up against that. There needs to be some space to avoid getting into any of their footings. But
I think at one time you'd had in at least the design maybe a walkover, or I know when I had a parking garage in Frederick, Maryland, when you walked out of the back of the public garage, you went down right onto the street level, and there was 2 restaurants side by side that had kind of a back entrance that you went into by a patio.
yeah.
So things like that seem to be completely feasible.
There are, and I think of the walk areas in Aggieville that exist today between buildings, where you come out somebody's back door and then there you are at another building. Increasing that density is what we're talking about. And if you remember, the zoning regs require everybody who's going to redevelop anything to go to a 3-story minimum. Mm-hmm. So as you walk out of other buildings in the future, you're going to be faced with a more dense, vertical relationship with your neighbor, and that's very likely to occur not on Morrow, but on Laramie, Bluemont, and the area surrounding it.
Good. Other comments, please, from questions?
No, I think, and this has been a long time coming, like I said earlier, I do want, since this is, we haven't gone to design or anything of that sort, I think those comments are important to also bring it to the discussion instead of as an afterthought, mainly because the structure is going to be so large and it can be very daunting. And if you're a small business, one of the things we want to do is also incentivize our small businesses to be successful. We don't want them to shut down because we have big box stores coming in or something else that's going to come and take over. These are people that are invested in the community and have been here for decades and have roots here. So we also want them to feel, take ownership of it and still continue to be successful where they are. So let's see what we can do and bring those comments into it, because tonight we're just discussing about moving forward. We haven't done anything else as far as the actual concepts themselves. I'm not a huge fan of parking garages. I think I've said it over and over and over again, but it seems to me when I go to other communities or when I hear other people talking, especially in the economic development sector, when you go somewhere and you see cranes and buildings and construction happening, that's what motivates other businesses and other organizations to come to that community, to invest in that community. So we're making an investment into Aggieville. And we can't afford to be complacent, and we can't afford to just stand still and see what happens. So I think this commission is only going to have a very small part of it. So this is going to be an ongoing process for several years. And what happens in November is going to be a key part of that as far as the sales tax is concerned as well. So this can move forward or can stop. It might take many, many years. But I think all the years that have been put into it thus far have brought us here. So I am in support of tonight's, at least for the public hearing, and I'm willing to move forward with it and bringing in the comments that were made. I think the parking lot, parking garage, one of the things we talked about was the fee structure. So that's still of interest to me, how that's going to look and what kind of office spaces are we going to have in that. Because that is one of the, I wouldn't say a huge revenue source, but that is one of the pieces that was part of this proposal as far as feasibility. So let's look at that a little bit closer. Having Wi-Fi there is, I think, is extremely important as people start to find co-working places. They're mostly remote now. So some of those things, I like the discussions we're having. I think it's going to be great for Aggieville, and we want to see that become the urban core district we've been talking about, and also with the UDO. When we talk about proposals, I don't know where the UDO fits into all of this. So I want to see that as well, because we're talking about lots of moving pieces and they kind of all have to come together. But at this preliminary stage, I think I'm comfortable with the discussion.
I'm supportive of this, moving forward, this redevelopment plan, and with all of the projects, including the parking garage. Conceptually, I think all of the projects are good if we have enough funding, right? Even the parking garage, the only thing that I despise more than all of our development decisions being driven by parking first, is having a bunch of ground parking and wasted space scattered along our city. So if we could find a way to condense that parking in a parking garage and find other uses for those things that are parking lots right now, I would love to do that. Where it always comes down for me, and we'll have to see how this pans out over the next few months, is if funding doesn't come through. We have had a lot of projects in the last 2 years come before me as a city commissioner. I don't think one time city staff has ever come back to me and said, we have more money than what we expected. It's usually we have less money than what we expected. And so I was telling the other commissioners a story. I went to Bricktown in Oklahoma City not even 3 weeks ago with my family to visit, and we walked at least 6 blocks to get to Bricktown. We walked a pretty far away, didn't even think about it. And when I was excited about being there and about all the cool things that they had done in Bricktown, not one time did a parking garage cross my mind as that was the catalyst, or that was the thing that changed everything for me. And so if we have a limited amount of money, that's why I'm asking these questions now about what projects are more important to us and why. That way we can make those decisions when that time comes. Yeah, because the one last point in general that I just want to make, I'm 27 years old. I go to Aggieville frequently, and I've been to Aggieville frequently during my time in college. I have never once had to park more than probably 2 blocks away from Aggieville to get there. Never one time. And usually I get a parking spot in one of the main parking lots or in front of the business that I'm going to. So to me, when it comes to these additional infrastructures and amenities on things like 12th Street and Laramie that really could create flair and pizzazz that people that are my age that I talk to, that I work with, are really excited about, that's what I want to spend money on. So that's why I'm having questions about this. Again, I hope revenue comes through via the sales tax in the TIF district and we can do all of these things, but I think it's important that we ask these questions now, even though we're not quite there yet. But for tonight, I'm supportive of this.
I'm supportive of the redevelopment plan and the TIF district, setting it up and kicking it off. I'm interested ultimately in what happens east of 11th Street even, and because the growth is so limited in all directions except to the east. We have as far as I'm concerned, the future of Aggieville in our hands. And we have to blow oxygen to it, I think, and make sure that it keeps a fire. And we do not want to do anything that dampens or tamps down Aggieville's appeal. And at a time when our community is exploring all ways to bring people to our community as tourists, as visitors, we have to it seems to me we have to invest in ourselves, and that's what we're doing with Aggieville. There's no magic big money going to come to fix all of this, and this has to do with infrastructure, and that's what the city is always on the hook for. The pipes underneath the streets, the pavement, all of that. We rely on private investors to build the buildings. So this is our contribution, and we know how old some of the pipes maybe under Aggieville are. So this is a perfect opportunity, the only opportunity we've had to really go forward with this. And I'm, you know, I don't want to spend money any more than anybody else does, but I think that we are pulling a package together that will ultimately be appealing. And so I plan to support this.
And of course, there's already extensive concept plans on everything that we've looked at over the past, 6 months, I think, on streetscapes and garages, and all this motion is doing is finalizing the design of that, and I think the design has to accommodate all the local businesses that was brought up tonight, so that, no harm is done. It's got to make it better, and I think the catalyst is parking, number one, and then how we phase that in, as Commissioner McKee says, maybe the 12th Street thing gets done first before the garage, based on money coming in and some logical reasons. But all we're doing tonight is just moving forward with a concept plan. As the money comes in, we'll phase it in. So I have no problems with it.
Maybe just a comment. Just like to thank not only the staff, but the citizens at large, the people down in Aggieville in particular. But over the past couple of years, there's been a lot of heavy lifting done by taking the time to have town halls, if you will, so people get an opportunity to look at the conceptual designs in conjunction with some of the drawings and so on done by students out at KSU and some of the professors. And then some of the trips that have been taken to places like Lincoln and Des Moines and Fayetteville to see kind of how they handled growth and how they promoted growth. And then there's also, I think, a lot of energy created between this conjunction of KSU and Aggieville. I mean, after all, if you drive in on Bluemont from the east, this is one of the entryways to Kansas State University. And having that really an eye catcher, and perhaps in the future a center for entrepreneurship, is very encouraging. So I think there's a lot of goodness in this concept, and we'll just kind of make sure that everybody is accommodated as we move forward. This is still a long stretch to go here before we get some real heavy drawings on paper. So, all right. Well, can we entertain a...
Okay, I'll make the motion. We approve first reading of an ordinance adopting the proposed redevelopment plan for the Aggieville project area in the Aggieville Redevelopment District in Manhattan, Kansas.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Reddy,
Yes.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner McKee,
Yes.
Commissioner Morse,
Yes.
Mayor Dodson.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Now we'll move to Section 4 of the general agenda, and item A is the city flag design. I thought everybody was here for the city flag design.
Yeah, I'll just put my name down first.
Okay. So the presenter tonight is Vivian, and our public information officer.
Thank you, Mayor Dotson, and good evening, Commissioners. I have a very brief presentation to share with you that describes the purpose of the City Flag Contest and the results of the public vote. So first, this is an image of the current City of Manhattan flag. The flag is displayed at City Hall and in Flag Plaza at City Park. It was based on the City of Manhattan logo, as was the previous flag design. Here's an image of the previous design, and This one was created in the mid-1990s. The City of Manhattan logos are used on city vehicles, water towers, and apparel worn by city staff, but the flag itself was not embraced by the community or used outside of those two display locations. The goal of the City Flag Design Contest was to find a meaningful symbol that focused on the community rather on the city's logo, and would be a symbol residents could claim as their own and even reproduce on t-shirts or stickers if they chose, as a symbol of their civic pride. The concept to adopt a new flag design originated back in July of 2018, when a member of the City Commission shared a TED Talk by Roman Mars outlining the principles of good flag design. And then after discussing the idea with city staff and with the public via social media, staff decided to move forward and explore the possibilities. We met with a graphic design firm in the area and were quoted $5,000 to $10,000 for the work. And since there were no dedicated funds for the project that could accommodate a price tag like that, staff began researching other options and found that several other cities, including Orlando and Topeka, had successfully completed flag design contests. The option of creating a new design in-house was also discussed, but involving the public in the process would help generate public interest and also give people the opportunity to express their love of Manhattan. So based on that idea, the city's legal department developed contest rules and regulations in order to protect the intellectual property that the graphic design submissions would represent. Staff presented the idea to the City Commission at a briefing session on January 29th and were given the direction to proceed. The contest was launched in February 2019, and a total of 120 submissions were received by the March 29 deadline. A key provision was that the designs and color schemes could be altered to address hand-drawn submittals and other design issues. The Arts and Humanities Advisory Board worked with staff to select finalists based on the 5 principles of good flag design outlined by the North American Vexillological Association. That was hard to say. So these are the 5 principles. First, keep it simple. The flag should be so simple that a child can draw it from memory. 2, use symbols meaningful to the city of Manhattan. The flag's images, colors, or patterns should relate to what it symbolizes. 3 was use 2 to 3 basic colors. Limit the number of colors to 3, which contrast well and come from the standard color set of red, blue, green, black, yellow, and white. 4, no lettering or seals. Never use any writing or any kind of an organization's seal. 5, be distinctive or be related. Avoid duplicating other flags, but use similarities to show connections. The Arts and Humanities Advisory Board reviewed the submissions and worked with us to select 7 finalists. The 6 runners-up are presented here. Then the finalists were presented for public vote on July 1st, and a total of 3,021 votes were submitted by the July 14th deadline. The participation of artists who submitted the 120 designs, and then the 3,000 plus people who voted are positive indications that the community was engaged in the process. However, there were mixed reactions to the finalists as expressed in comments on social media and in the Manhattan Mercury. The results of the vote also indicate that the public had mixed feelings about the designs. It was a really close race. The winner received 867 votes, and the runner-up had 854, which represents a difference of only 0.6%. Both of the top designs featured apples, and the third place design was actually a variation on the winner. So this was the winning design, called Little Apple on the Prairie. It was submitted by artist Kimberly Medved of Pennsylvania. This is the runner-up, called Sunflower by Jordan Peters. This was second place. And then third place was Shining Star of the Prairie, which was that variation based on Kim Medved's original design. So Kimberly actually submitted 3 designs, which was the limit for any artist. All 3 had Apple themes and were based on research she had done about the Manhattan community. She had a friend in Manhattan. She saw the details of the contest online and thought it would be fun to participate. According to information from the chamber, I was curious about the little apple and when we adopted it and the history behind that, if there was one. And on the Chamber of Commerce website, it said the nickname was dusted off for a 1970s New York City tourism campaign. And a short while later, Manhattan, Kansas sought the Little Apple moniker trademark, probably around the year 1977. And the recognition is used to promote Manhattan as a tourism destination and North Central Kansas hub for conventions, economic development, industrial advancement, and trade. So there are many common symbols in the design submitted. The apples, of course, rolling hills, rivers, grasses, and sunshine. And in the winning design, the apple rising out of the hillside symbolizes the city's progress and development as a land of opportunity and recognizes Manhattan's nickname as the Little Apple. The shape of the hillside is a reference to the gently rolling Flint Hills and can be found in the city's logo as well. Colors: green, fertility of the land; blue, big blue in Kansas rivers, peace, and the expanse of sky over the prairie; and white was used to symbolize Manhattan's limitless future. So the City of Manhattan flag is displayed, as I said, in front of City Hall, as well as at Flag Plaza in City Park. And if a new flag is adopted, the logo for the City of Manhattan will remain the same, and the branding for city vehicles and other resources will not be changed. The design will be available for the public and for merchants to reproduce via a Creative Commons license, which does not require any sort of royalties or fees to use, but states that the design cannot be altered when it is reproduced. So you have several options for this evening, which are outlined in your packet. So, and thank you for your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Jared, for doing this as your first initiative coming onto the City of Manhattan.
It was a really good TED Talk.
So, and it did prompt us to do something different and unique. So I think I want to thank all the 120 people that, or 120 designs that were submitted, and the Manhattan Arts and Humanities for taking the time to judge them, as well as having 3,000 plus people vote on this. And I think this is the type of thing people take ownership of and have pride in. Even if theirs is not picked, I think the fact that there was such genuine interest. The rest of this stuff, you know, people may or may not care about everything that we do, but this is something that represents Manhattan, and people take a lot of pride in it, and they want to see what we're coming up with. And it seems like, just from all the images, I mean, that was a lot of work for them to even go through all of them. So I'm very happy with it, and I wouldn't mind. I think this is something, because they had input in it, I would like to support. Our logo stays the same, but the flag design, once in a while, it's to kind of reinvent yourself and think a little different and not stay still. Let's do something different and unique that the community had buy-in into. So I think it's a great idea. So thank you.
What prompted me to even sit in the TED Talk at first was just seeing what Wichita has done with their city flag over the last few years, and just when you go to Wichita now, I mean, it's quite often that people will have like stickers on their laptop with the flag. You can tell it's like a very big source of pride for them. And I felt like here in Manhattan we didn't have that, and I didn't even know what the city flag was. So that prompted me to look at the flag, and I was like, I wonder why we chose that, and then it led me into that TED Talk in which I sent out. I am also thankful for everybody who participated in terms of the Arts and Humanities Board, and the people who submitted designs, and the people who voted. My favorite design didn't win. I honestly and frankly didn't want a design with an apple in it, but nonetheless, that is what the people chose, and that's something that people can take pride in the fact that like there was this community process that happened in order to pick that design, and because of that, it's something I can be proud of as well. So the only other thing that I would say about this is reading like some of the social media comments regarding this. I think people got a little bit too up arms and probably a little bit too passionate about it. Just because we spend 30 minutes talking about a flag design and essentially replacing one flag ultimately of what our decision doesn't mean that we as a community and a city commission can't work on really difficult issues at the same time, right? Like we just talked about a very big proposal in Aggieville right before this, and we're going to talk about our city budget right after. This isn't pulling scope away from anything the rest of us are doing. But nonetheless, it allows people to engage with the city in something in a more positive way rather than just paying a bill or talking about your taxes. So I am excited about supporting and adopting this new flag that the community voted on, and I cannot wait for someone to start making stickers so I can put one on my surface. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And my only comment is I would have liked the vote to have included the current flag. I think the process was flawed a little bit, and the fact that it should have been, as part of the voting, pick one of these or keep the current one. So I don't know how many people would have voted to keep the current one, so that was my only complaint on the process.
Well, I just think it's a good idea to update this flag that you're proposing and that the community has supported is an update, and it fits very well with the flags that other communities are adopting in this age where things are more graphic and more brighter. And so I think it's a good idea, and I appreciate all the input, and that we have a final winner, so to speak, that there was some competition.
Right-hand side, from the little kids. It was, I mean, you could either say they were crayon drawings or you could say they were op art, but they're, I really appreciated having those from the kids.
I think we liked receiving those the most too.
Yeah.
There were some families that did it as a whole project for the household and came up with some really great things.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, yeah.
Okay.
Is
Thank
there
you.
any public comment on the adoption of the flag? Yeah, please do.
Is this my legacy?
Yeah.
I move we adopt the little apple on the prairie as the official flag design for the city of Manhattan, Kansas.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Butler,
No.
Commissioner McKee,
Yes.
Commissioner Morse,
Yes.
Mayor Dodson,
Yes?
and Commissioner Reddy.
Yes.
Motion carries 4-1.
All right, now we'll go back and pick up item G1 from the consent agenda. That item is to G, approve the following, item 1, ordinance number 7441, adopting the 2020 city budget.
Good evening, Commissioners. Bernie Hann, your Director of Finance. What questions may I try to answer?
Yeah, I don't really have any questions, Bernie. What my concern is that two things, the reason I moved them. One is, the city budget itself, I don't think should be on the consent agenda ever, because it's one of the major things we do every year, so I wanted the vote to be separate. I think I mentioned that to Ron earlier this week, so I wanted that distinct as not part of it. And then secondly, the ordinance that covers the pay scale is directly related to the budget thing. Now, as I went back looking through this, I'm very concerned about the sales tax issue. Now, I support, us going with the sales tax. I think generally it's gonna be better for everyone, especially business, than increasing property tax by 6 mils. But I think we gotta send a resounding message that if we're going to support that sales tax, that means we're not gonna be pushing for higher mill levies. And I do like what we did this year. We started with a big high 4 mil. We got it down to 0.4, so I appreciate that. But I still want it to go to 0. And I looked at, Ron wrote us a good memo last week saying, here's some of the things we can do. And I don't understand why we don't do some of them. Like one of them, basically says here that to reduce it, we could hold contractual commodities to the 2019 level. And then the memo says, well, that only yields 200,000 out of the 238 we need. Well, why don't we get the 200,000? Get the 38 somewhere else. So that would be step one. And step two, as I look at the pay scale, every time we do these COLAs, 1.6%, it kicks up the maximum pay. So it spirals over into the next year and the next year. And that seems to outpace inflation. So I'm not so sure I like the idea of a 1.6% COLA across the board. Now, as I looked at our pay scale, we've got over 34 positions that are over $100,000. And we've got 16 that are over $120,000. So what I would do is target the 1.6 COLA to all the low positions and not give it to the high ones. I think that would make up the other 36,000 that's needed on that, and we could have a flat mill levy. And I wanted to just make that case so that when people go to vote in November, understand that what I believe is that if the sales tax gets passed, we're not going to see any more mill levy hikes, at least for a while, because that's to make up, 6 mills. But I think a lot of people don't have the faith that the commission will do that. And of course, there'll be a different commission up here when that happens next year anyway. Depends on who you vote for. But I believe that it's possible to reach, the 0 mill levy, but it requires some tough calls. And part of it may be it's time to take a look at these pay scales and tweak them. I'm not saying, across the board slash, because I get it. You got retention issues and you've got to keep certain people, but is that true for all of them? And is it true for those, top 16 positions? I don't think so.
And just to kind of, Commissioner Butler in general, his comments I agree with. I voted no on the budget because I felt like there was some more room for us to reduce it this year, not without pain, but we could have done it. With that being said, because I don't feel like I made myself clear last time, excuse me, I still think there is kind of this narrative that no one is talking about that I think is really important to tell, and I just want to reiterate it one more time. From 2016 to 2020, really when the commission does budgeting, the only money that we're playing with is general fund money, which is around $31,000, almost $32,000. From the 2016 budget to the 2020 budget, what we passed last time, the increase in that general fund amount was 1.4 million. Which is if you apply the percentage of inflation to that general fund budget isn't even keeping up with inflation, let alone a growing community that has additional expenses that we need to pay for. So we could make these cuts these years, this coming budget, right? We could be in pain for a year, but that's not gonna put us in any better position next year. We're gonna face the same exact problem next year, and we're going to face the same exact problem the year after unless something fundamentally changes. And so that might be the sales tax, it might be better partnerships from the state, but the reality is that the reason why your taxes go up regularly is because the city has almost no choice, right? Like, we'll always be in this position year after year unless something fundamentally changes. So I agree with Commissioner Butler. I think that we could make some additional cuts this year and live in pain for a year, but we can't do that for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Something has to change. This isn't city staff rampantly spending money. There's just a fundamental issue about how our budget's growing over time.
Well, I agree with both of you to some extent, commissioners, but I want to remind you, while indeed salaries are part of the big issue, about 1.2 million in the increase that you see in the general fund, you have to look at the bigger picture as well and look backwards. We've been in this situation of making these periodic annual increases to salaries, but we've done so in an environment where revenues were much different, and where the revenues, in fact, in some cases, were outstripping the increases in expenditures. We actually had a bona fide tax decrease about 10 years ago, bona fide, where property taxes were reduced, and the reason was because sales taxes and the valuation of the city, the tax base, were going up roughly at 8% each. That isn't happening now. And without that additional revenue growth that we have been experiencing over the last 2 decades, that I really almost 2 that I've been back, you're in these kind of very difficult situations. And I agree with Commissioner Butler. They call for hard choices and tough choices. But I like to think that those have been made, and that the increase that you see is marginal, $238,000 in increase in property taxes. And I understand that's not much, and of course we can get it down to 0. We could turn right around and just simply reduce the cash reserves in the general fund from $750,000 to $500,000. And that would take care of everything without touching any other expenditure. But in terms of the long term, that is it rings the death knell in our rating agencies to see that kind of movement take place. So the rating agencies, as I think do the general public, and certainly you as 5 commissioners and all of city staff, I think you understand the dilemma that we're in. Those who watch this, and I'm speaking especially of our rating agencies because they read every edition of the Manhattan Mercury, and on occasion will call me up and say, did this really happen the way it was reported? They understand that we have flat revenues, and yet that, you can call it a siren's call, but that need to keep pace with other entities around this community in terms of salaries to stay competitive. And I think you could look at and ask anytime, and I'd invite any of you to come in and talk to any of us, but our HR director, Tammy Galvan, about the retention issues that we face and the difficulty we face in keeping staff. It's a tough issue, commissioners, and I do understand it. I'm sorry.
I do want to clarify just one thing.
Yes.
I don't necessarily agree with Commissioner Butler's salary assessment. I think the cuts could come from elsewhere. That wasn't the only thing listed on that memo, right? I am fine with step increases and COLAs, but to me, you're right, it's a nominal increase, but these nominal increases have been happening every year for a significant amount of time. And this is my opinion, but if you look at every time a municipality does a tax increase rather than its sales or property tax, it put the largest burden it's mostly low and middle class people taking money from other low and middle class people. Like, it's not a progressive manner in which to generate revenue. And so I know we can't do this in the long term, but even if it's, as you said, it's only $238,000 and a $30 million budget. Can we, in a general fund, 160 total? So we could find it for 1 year, but I do want to make the point, and that's why I've said it every time, I don't think it's sustainable to do this over a long period of time.
Well, and I agree, Commissioner. I mean, we could do that any 1 year, and of course I'd have to look to the city manager, but I think that it's the issue of where we're headed and how we're going to get there. I'll be quite honest with you, I'm old enough to have seen so much in my lifetime. I feel so fortunate about that, especially working with other cities across Kansas. I've seen cities that have taken that pull back, step back, and reduce whatever it might be, and invariably that is a mistake. I've seen it time and again. Most of those cities are small. Most of them simply don't recover when they do that. And I think that's the pressure that's put on city management to have to deal with revenues that are flat right now, and we know the reasons, and yet trying to figure out how we keep pace with what we think is future growth as well. It's a tough one, commissioners. I understand that, but I don't think that what we have right now is going to necessarily become a problem. Pulling back too far or doing something just as easy as reducing your cash reserves, but all of those send messages that I would caution you to be aware of at least.
So Bernie, I just wanted to say, I think the amount we increase, though it's not any of us prefer to increase any of the property taxes. But when people look to Manhattan, they are seeing a growing community. They are feeling optimistic. They are feeling positive. And if you want to recruit businesses or students or families or young professionals, whatever it is, that needs to continue. One of the reasons I'm ambivalent to looking at COLA or salary increases is because even if we cut them or keep them flat 1 year or even 2 years, it also impacts their retirement. It impacts capers. It impacts other areas of a person's life. And most of these people are not getting rich off of us. These are people that are just making a living like the rest of us. And it's a very competitive area where we have a lot of young people being trained in Manhattan in our professions and can leave to Kansas City, can go somewhere else. And we need to try to keep them here. So I think the budget decision we came to, I'm comfortable with, mainly because we are still growing. I think if we collect sales tax is huge. If we can get that online sales tax, that would be great too, if it was implemented on October 1st and we start getting some of those rewards. Maybe get some of the income tax back like it was originally supposed to be, and have some of the things that are supposed to be funded by the state and federal level get funded again. I think that's where we're seeing, we're having to pick up all of those gaps. But right now, as far as playing around with COLA or with step increases, being a teacher, I was never in favor of that then, and I'm not in favor of it right now.
There's one last thing, and I don't want to drag this out unnecessarily, but I would like to speak to Commissioner Butler's comment about the sales tax increase of 0.3 and what we're doing in the budget on this nominal mill levy increase. I think it's two separate issues, Commissioner, I really do. Though that sales tax issue, it has nothing to do with operations. It has to do with everything we have on the drawing board that we believe is going to enhance and further this community growth and get things moving again as they have in the past. I'm happy to answer any other questions you might have.
I think we're relatively stuck with the taxing authorities we have. I mean, to suggest that somehow we're going to have a non-progressive tax when you only have property tax and sales tax, you'd have to go to an income tax in order to find a remedy for that. So that's why we're cautious, because we do know that those factors exist. I think we need to remember where we came from. You know, I mean, we've cut $2.5 million out of the budget that was originally presented. So finding $238,000, why it might be easy, is a bit symbolic at this point. And you could argue that we may have foregone $250,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 that we might have cut somewhere else. But we chose not to, because we've gone through whatever this is, the third month of consideration. And I think Commissioner Butler is right. I'd just say that you know, when people are presented their tax bill, and this is kind of an unpleasant but true phenomena, they consider those taxes from the city, because most of the people live in Manhattan, when in reality, half of those taxes go to the school and the other half is split between us and the county, and then half of ours goes to RCPD. So when you get right down to it, we don't have all that much money coming out of what starts out to be, I think this year, close to 160 mils of taxes on property. So we don't have a lot of options. I agree with Commissioner Reddy that, you know, we need to move forward. This is not the time to pull back. We need to make sure that we're making investments to make this community better and stronger. So I think three of us voted to kind of what we thought was the de minimis amount anyway before, so we can go from there.
To the mayor's point, though, the meeting that Riley County is putting together, I do hope one of the topics that they talk about is revenue sharing. So when I talk about, you know, how can we at least make this a little bit more of a fair system, that revenue sharing that could potentially be garnered from the state doing a capital gains tax or another income tax bracket is exactly what I'm talking about. Even that $500,000 we are getting back a year, if we have a rough year, that covers the COLA and step increases that we're
Both of
talking
those
about every year.
together for the city of Manhattan are almost $2 million.
Exactly. So I hope Raleigh County continues to push on that, and I hope moving forward this body continues to do that as well.
So is there any public comment on this item G1? What's that?
NJ.
Well, we've got to do one at a time. Okay, go ahead. There's no public hearing, it's public comment.
Comment. I just want to say that I supported the .4 mil increase earlier and would support it again this evening. We cannot stagnate as a community. We have to grow, and this is ever so slight. This is not a giant leap by any means. At a time when other communities are constricting and losing population, Manhattan has been a growing and continues to be a growing community. And ever so slight, we are not growing by leaps and bounds anymore, but we are moving in the right direction, and we're taking some of the necessary steps we have to continue to grow into the future. And it's that future we're working toward as commissioners and as a community. So it would be nice to chop something. I would rather chop some, not agree to fund some of the projects that will come in this door in a month or two after we just pass the budget. That's the part I object to, is just the impromptu or ad hoc requests. I think we ought to have more of this in the budget so that we can adequately fund, adequately look at the whole picture and not just on a whim. So anyway, thank you.
We can have a motion either way. We can have a motion to reconsider G1 as originally proposed, or we can go to your amendment.
I'll take care of the motion. I just want to make one last comment. As Bernie said, the sales tax and general fund, I really do see them as the same thing. Because this sales tax, as we're proposing it on the ballot, is a permanent sales tax, which means it's a strategic move to fund the city a different way. More on sales tax than property tax, which I'm all for, because I don't like property tax. And I think if you do the calculations, most people will come out ahead. And businesses for sure will come out ahead because they get taxed at a much higher rate. So I'm still in favor, of the sales tax. And the reason I wanted to drive the mill levy to zero was just send the message that, please vote for the sales tax, and hopefully future commissions will take that into consideration, because I know a lot of people have a fear that the sales tax is going to go up and the mill levy is going to continue to go up. And I, for one, am not going to support both. So I'm putting all, my marbles in the bag for the sales tax, not on the property tax, which is why I brought this up again tonight. But to make the vote easy, I move that we approve ordinance number 7441, approving the 2020 city budget.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Commissioner McGee,
No.
Commissioner Morse,
Yes.
Mayor Dodson,
Yes?
Commissioner Reddy,
Yes.
Commissioner Butler.
No.
Motion carries 3-2.
And then I'll make another motion that we approve first reading of the salary ordinance, establishing a new range of salaries for 2020 for city employees.
Second.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Morse,
Yes.
Mayor Dodson,
Yes?
Commissioner Reddy,
Yes.
Commissioner Butler,
No.
Commissioner McKee.
Yes.
Motion carries 4-1.
All right, there being no further business before the commission, We'll stand adjourned. Thanks, everyone.